In the hills of Galilee, as the sun began to set and the golden light filled the sky, a great crowd of people gathered at the foot of a mountain. They had traveled from far and wide, some from nearby villages, some from the bustling cities of Judea, and others from across the Sea of Galilee. They came with hearts full of hope and anticipation, eager to hear the words of a man who was unlike any other. His name was Jesus, and his reputation as a healer, teacher, and miracle worker had spread across the land. As the crowd settled down, Jesus, with his disciples gathered around him, climbed up the mountainside. The air was still and the people grew quiet, waiting to hear what this remarkable teacher would say. Jesus sat down, a position of authority in those days, and with the gentle breeze rustling through his robes, he began to speak. His voice carried clearly through the hills, and the people leaned in, eager to listen. He started with a simple yet powerful statement, one that would change the way they understood the world. "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." At first the people were puzzled. Poor in spirit, what did that mean? The religious leaders and the wealthy often spoke of God's blessings as something to be earned, something for the righteous and prosperous. But Jesus was saying that those who were humble, those who recognized their need for God, were the ones who would receive the greatest reward. His words were revolutionary, upside down compared to what they had always heard. Jesus continued, his eyes scanning the crowd, noticing the weary faces, the hungry hearts, the broken lives. "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." There were many in the crowd who had lost loved ones, who carried the weight of grief and sorrow. Some were mourning their broken dreams, others their pain and suffering. They knew hardship well, but now they heard that comfort was promised to them. They would not be forgotten in their pain. Jesus was offering them hope that no sorrow was too deep for God's healing touch. As Jesus spoke, his words seemed to cut through the air with authority, but also with compassion. "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." The people around him, some poor and oppressed, some weary from the weight of their burdens, knew that meekness wasn't weakness. Meekness meant gentleness, humility, and patience. In a world that praised strength, power, and dominance, Jesus turned everything upside down. He said that it wasn't the powerful who would inherit the earth, but those who humbly trusted in God's justice. The meek would inherit the earth, not by conquering, but by trusting in God's sovereignty. "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." Jesus spoke of a deep, unquenchable longing, not for food or water, but for what was right and just. The people understood this longing well. They longed for justice in their lives, in their families, in their land. They longed for the world to be made right. Jesus promised that this deep desire for righteousness would not go unfulfilled. Those who thirst for justice and righteousness would be satisfied, for God himself would provide what they so desperately needed. The next words that Jesus spoke were like a balm for the souls of the crowd, each of them searching for peace in a broken world. "Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy." In a world that often felt unforgiving and harsh, Jesus spoke of mercy, the kind of mercy that would heal wounds, rebuild relationships, and restore hope. He promised that those who showed mercy to others would themselves experience mercy from God. And then he said, with deep compassion, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." The people looked at one another, wondering who among them could be pure in heart. After all, they had all fallen short, had all sinned. But Jesus spoke not just of outward purity, but of an inner, heart-level transformation. Those whose hearts were clean, who sought to love and serve God with sincerity and truth, would see God. The promise of intimacy with the Creator was one they could hardly imagine. The next words that Jesus spoke were like a balm for the souls of the crowd, each of them searching for peace in a broken world. "Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy." In a world that often felt unforgiving and harsh, Jesus spoke of mercy, the kind of mercy that would heal wounds, rebuild relationships, and restore hope. He promised that those who showed mercy to others would themselves experience mercy from God. And then he said, with deep compassion, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." The people looked at one another, wondering who among them could be pure in heart. After all, they had all fallen short and had all sinned. But Jesus spoke not just of outward purity, but of an inner, heart-level transformation. Those whose hearts were clean, who sought to love and serve God with sincerity and truth, would see God. The promise of intimacy with the Creator was one they could hardly imagine. As the words of the Beatitudes hung in the air, a sense of peace seemed to wash over the crowd. People who had once felt unimportant, unnoticed, or rejected now felt seen and heard by God. Jesus had spoken to their hearts, addressing their pain, their desires, and their struggles. His message was one of hope. The kingdom of heaven was not for the powerful, but for the humble, the poor in spirit, the brokenhearted, and the merciful. For some, the Beatitudes were a revelation, a glimpse of the world as God intended it to be. For others, they were a challenge, a call to live differently, to seek not power or fame, but to embrace humility, mercy, and righteousness. Jesus was painting a picture of a new kind of kingdom, one where love, grace, and justice reigned, and where those who were often overlooked were the ones who would inherit God's promises. The Beatitudes are not just ancient words spoken to a crowd on a mountainside. They are timeless truths that continue to speak to us today. Jesus' message challenges our perspective on what it means to live a blessed life. True blessing isn't found in wealth, status, or success, but in a heart that seeks God and His kingdom. As we reflect on these powerful words, we are called to embrace humility and recognize our need for God, offer mercy and seek reconciliation in our relationships, pursue righteousness and work for justice in our world, make peace where there is conflict and division, stand firm in faith even when facing persecution or hardship. Jesus invites you into His kingdom, a kingdom where the broken, the humble, and the merciful are honored. How can you live out the Beatitudes in your own life today? Perhaps it's showing mercy to someone who has wronged you. Maybe it's standing up for what is right, even when it's hard, or it could be seeking peace in a situation where conflict reigns. Wherever you find yourself, remember that Jesus' words are not just for the crowd on the mountaintop, they are for you. Will you follow the path of humility, mercy, and righteousness that leads to the kingdom of heaven? Take a moment to reflect on these words and ask God how you can live them out in your daily life.